I've lived in Boulder since 1966.
Since 1959.
Since 1959.
For 46 years.
1962.
We were part of the 2,000 or 3,000 best friends that moved here with IBM.
There were no solid built synagogues. There were no JCCs. There was no Hebrew school set up for the children. And there were no bagels in the town of Boulder.
There weren't very many identifiable Jews or Jews belonging to Jewish organizations.
Barbara said, if we're going to be Jews in Boulder, we're going to have to work at it.
I met a guy by the name of Bill Bach. He suggested that I might want to join the small Jewish community, which at that time was called the Boulder Jewish Fellowship.
It was mostly ethical Jews, not spiritual Jews.
As soon as we connected, we were just absolutely welcomed with open arms.
We would meet at each other's homes on a regular basis, talking of the common problem, which mainly had to do with the religious education of the children.
Two Jews are stranded on a desert island, and they're there for 25 years, and then they're finally rescued. And the rescuers ask for a tour of the island, and on one side, here's this beautiful building. And they say to ask one of the Jews, ask one of them, well, what's that building that you made? Oh, I'm Reformed Jew, that's the Reformed synagogue. And so they go over to the other side of the island, there's another beautiful building. And they ask the other Jewish man, well, what's that building? Oh, I'm a conservative Jew, that's the conservative synagogue. And I said, well, what is that building in the middle of the island? Oh, that's the synagogue we don't go to.
It was common enough in small towns that you could only afford one congregation, and everybody modified their behavior accordingly.
There was no conservative reform or orthodox. In fact, we had no labeling here.
There were two groups in at least 1964, a Jewish study group and a fellowship group.
There were some who wanted a cultural sort of organization, others who wanted to do perhaps some services, but something to establish a Jewish presence in Boulder.
When the Israelites were gathered at the sea that was in front of them with the Egyptians pursuing them, they were arguing about who's going to go in first. Should I go in first? Should I go in first? We shouldn't go in first. Someone else should go in first. And all of the heads of the tribes were arguing. And Moses is sort of pleading and praying to God, like, how can this be? What are we to do? And all of a sudden, people hear this splash, and they look over, and Nachshon, who's the head of the tribe of Judah, has just jumped into the sea. And it was at that moment that the sea split. Of course, that's a different telling from the Torah story, which just has the sea splitting. But the point of the Midrash is that it required a person of great faith and commitment and courage to jump in. And only once Nachshon jumped in did the sea split.
One of us came up with the bright idea.
We decided to have a synagogue.
The fellowship people and the fellowship people who came before us, they found the land, they incorporated, they formed an organization, they walked the streets and knocked on doors to get people to commit financially.
We were there doing fundraisers, having parties, and doing potlucks so that we'd all come and we'd find another $20 and another $20.
And we had to be very much aware that this will take not just a few people, but a whole lot of people.
Once we got the land, we had to incorporate in order to build something.
Each made a personal commitment and a financial commitment to build the synagogue and to support the synagogue.
As the architect, I came up with a master plan, starting off with the fellowship hall, which would act temporarily as the sanctuary.
And it was heartrending for us to make the practical decision of putting the first bima on the south wall instead of on an eastern wall.
We built this initial structure for $35,000.
I, along with other officers, signed that note.
The reform movement furnished us with materials for the Sunday school. They made student rabbis available to us. And for a couple or 3 years, why, they were the most helpful. One of our first members, Marshall Rosenshine, furnished us with one Torah, and Sig Mandel furnished us or arranged for us to get the smaller Torah, which is, I think, a Sephardic Torah.
And then in 1966, I believe, we had a bricklaying party for this building. And everyone that was involved, all the families, they wrote little notes like they do in the wall in Jerusalem, and wrote them and put them inside the walls.
We sold bricks for $18 a piece. And the south wall of the social hall has bricks that were laid by the members and their children and their family with notes stuck into the holes in the bricks.
When I think about the group who had the courage to start an official Jewish organization with a building that says we're Jews in Boulder back in the 60s.
We were absolutely blessed to be in this place and at that time.
This is where I belong. This is where I receive COVID. This is where I feel comfortable.
We established a Jewish presence. We're the major Jewish organization in town.
I'm very honored and I feel very privileged to have started a synagogue. Coming from New York, I mean, who starts a synagogue?
Called my wife and told her to come out here. She said, "Are there any Jews there?" So I said, "Sure, there's plenty of Jews." I spoke to the rabbi. There was no rabbi. I spoke to the rabbi and he said, "If I come out here, he'll have a minion."
They were bound together with a common purpose, which was to create a Jewish home here for Jews. We don't always agree with each other. We remember different kinds of synagogues. We have different personalities, and we make holy places together.
If we can learn the lesson from the founders, that there's a time for planning and deliberation, and then there's a time to be nachshon and to jump into that sea, then I think that the future of the Jewish community in Boulder, and certainly the Jewish community at Har HaShem, can be a vibrant and rich one. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I think that the lesson of the founders is that amazing things can happen when you jump in.